everyone. My name's Audry Deal-McEver. I'm a full-time potter based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I also happen to be serving on the State Board of Tennessee Craft, and so I'm really excited to help facilitate this conversation today. We have another professional artist who I'm going to let introduce herself, the full explanation of what she does, but it's my good friend Melissa, who we've done a lot of shows together, so it's always nice to have these conversations with artists who you've already been in the trenches with. So I'll pass over to Melissa, and then I'll introduce Julie in just a minute too.
Hey, my name is Melissa Oesch, and my business is Reimagined by Luna, and I am a bookbinder and a leather worker. So I live in Kentucky, but I've been doing Tennessee Craft Fair for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years or something. And I've been a full-time artist for almost 12 years. So
awesome. So glad you're here with us.
Thanks.
So we also have Julia Wilburn, who I'll let her introduce herself, but she's bringing on a very different perspective that we artists really need too.
Hey guys, I'm Julia Wilburn. I am the Director of Communications and Artist Relations in the Tennessee Craft State Office. So I've been with Tennessee Craft for a little over 3 years. I handle all of the communication, social media, marketing, that kind of thing. And I also work with our artist programming. So anything to do with the fair, member scholarships, summer study, our Master Artist Apprentice program, all of those fun things. So I'm excited to be here.
Is it fair to say that if any artist has any questions about Tennessee Craft, you usually have the answer, Julia?
It is fair to say that if I don't have the answer, I will find it for you.
Julie is a wonderful resource. She's helped me a lot over the years with my random questions that pop up. So really glad she's here with us. So I'm going to lead us in a list of questions that we came up with in advance that seem to reflect the type of questions I know I get asked a lot by other artists who are trying to get started. Melissa, I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations with aspiring artists as well. So feel free to interject things along the way, but we just are going over some questions as a starting place. We would love for you to ask your own questions as we go. There's a chat feature in Zoom if you want to type them out there. At the end, our goal is to end a little early, so we'll do a specific question and answer time at the end. But Julie is keeping an eye on the chat in the meantime, so if you just need us to clarify something, feel free to jump in and type in the moment, and we'll try to work you in as we go too. But with that in mind, we'll dive right in. I want to start by just helping people figure out how to get started in this world, because I know a lot of the people who are here with us today or who are watching this video, or, you know, you've probably been to a craft fair, you know it's a thing, you know it looks fun and exciting, but it's really intimidating sometimes figuring out how to level up your career into actually being there selling. So you know, I'm a potter. I think the nice thing here is that Melissa and I are going to have very different perspectives on how we got started and also how we manage the logistics of these fairs. And I also just want to mention that this is going to be different if you ask a jewelry artist, if you ask a printmaker, you know, there is a lot of variation. So even though we're going to try to share our perspectives too, keep asking other artists questions too. That's the best way to learn. Yeah. So we'll dive right in. The first question I had on my list is just, how do you know if you're even ready to start selling at craft fairs? Because it is an investment, you know, you have to figure out your display and all that. So Melissa, how did you know that you were ready?
I just wanted to try it, and I wanted to see if it would work. I guess for me, it was kind of an experiment, like, could I do this? And so I started by going, I had a job that I worked 3 days a week, and then I made books 4 days a week. And yeah, I just decided to try. And to do my first show, the main thing was coming up with enough inventory to fill whatever my display was going to be. So I think that's how I knew that I was finally ready to send an application, was having enough inventory for my display.
And I think it might help contextualize too. Do you want to share at what point in your journey learning how to work with leather and be a book artist, at what point in that were you? Like, what kind of education did you have before that? Were you an aspiring artist? Were you an established artist who had just never done a craft fair? Where were you?
I was an English major. I never took an art class, so everything is self-taught. And I took one bookbinding class in somebody's house when I was in college, and it was awful, and I swore I'd never do it again. So it's life has jokes, basically. And I actually started an organization with some friends in college based on bookmaking, but my artist friends ran it. I did more of the administrative work. And then fast forward 7 or 8 years, and I needed to make some money in the winter and decided to put some books on Etsy, and stuff started moving. And I just thought, I'm just going to try. What if this could work? So
Nice.
What about you?
Yeah, so I studied ceramics in college, but I started off as a sculptor. So I was a few years out of college before I shifted my focus to making functional work and relearning how to be a potter and work on the wheel. And after shifting that focus, it was probably 6 years after that point before I tried a craft fair. And I had a full-time teaching job at the time. But I was already planning a exit strategy because I knew my next life chapter was going to be being self-employed. I really wanted to make my living off selling my work. So I started off, well, I had a full-time job, which was nice because I could save money and buy all the stuff you need to get started. But at that point, I'd been working with clay for about 10 years, and I was pretty established in my body of work. But I was like you, I had to learn how to produce enough, which is a logistical challenge, and really make sure I was happy with the body of work I was making. And I'll say, just as a teacher too, the advice I always give my students when they're realizing like, oh, I really like this, I want to do more of this, maybe I should start selling my work. I don't know if you've known people who fall into this trap, Melissa, but I always encourage people to make sure that they're really happy with their body of work before they start selling it. Because as soon as you start having pieces out in the world, no matter what they are, people come back and they want more. And if you're out there selling work that is kind of the surface level solution, the first thing you came up with, the first thing you had success with, you're going to get tired of it really quickly. And in some cases kind of get locked in to making work that you're no longer interested in. Do you know people who have fallen into that, Melissa?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because as someone who was making it up and had no help at all in the beginning, I did some of that. Yeah, and I guess I just started telling people that certain things were discontinued, and then there were certain things that became bread and butter, and it's like, it doesn't matter if I don't want to make it, it is how I like pay my bills, so
Yeah.
I just do it.
It's a delicate balance. I knew a potter who went to a big wholesale show and got an order. It was the first sale like that she'd ever done. And she got an order for 2,000 of the same clay birdhouse. And she quit after that year. Like she was a factory. She was not an artist anymore. You know,
Yeah.
She just was burnt out and crispy. And I felt really bad because she made wonderful work. So I always like to encourage people to make sure that you don't trap yourself being just a factory. Like, make sure you build in room for creativity, for experimentation. And I think if you're tactful, there are ways to do that in your body of work.
Yeah, it has to be done very intentionally though. Otherwise, people will tell you what you're going to do, and you don't have room for any of that creativity anymore.
Yeah, you can't let sales alone dictate everything you make, or you will become a factory.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. So from there, let's say that somebody does decide, okay, they're ready, I can make enough, I have the inventory. There's so many different type of art fairs, craft fairs. You sell at Renaissance fairs. I mean, there's so many places to sell your work. And I'm curious to hear how you found the mix you do. And I'd love if you can kind of share with us, what is your mix? How many shows a year do you do? What do they look like? How far do you travel?
Yeah, so many questions. Okay, so I've probably done as many as like 35 shows a year. One time I did 10 weekends in a row. Basically, I've done things that I will tell you probably not to do. I'm what some people call a road warrior. And I'm working on undoing some of that and just trying to pick my favorite shows. But now I have so many that, you know, I have regular customers at all of them, and it's hard to want to pass any of them up. But to get started, I really started at our local farmers market. We have an artist market, and that's kind of where I started. Set up 4 hours every Saturday for a summer, And I learned a lot about pricing there. I learned a lot of what customers gravitate towards. And it gave me a little time to start finding the bigger shows, because you have to apply so far in advance. And when I decided to go full time, I didn't realize the logistics of that, that you're applying 6 to 8 months before a show happens. But it gave me time to do a little research and to have a better idea of what I was getting into with like pricing and my inventory stock and all of that. As far as traveling goes, at this point, I largely stay within 6 hours, but I still from time to time will travel as far as 14 or 16, but generally it's within 3 to 6. So nice face, Julia.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at our fairs, like how far people come, and the fact that you guys do this every weekend, and it exhausts me. It's amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah, and there's such a huge range. I mean, my neighbor at a show I did this spring does 45 shows a year. I usually do, the most I've ever done was 18 in 1 year. And I think this year I'm going to hit maybe 11 or 12. And I think that that's my sweet spot in terms of sustainability for me. But there's also a lot of change, like talking about what types of shows to apply to. I've learned, because my process is slow, if you all don't know what my work looks like, it's wheel thrown pots that are all hand carved with pattern. They're all different. So it's not like I can just hit that with a stamp and recreate the pattern. They're all different and they're slow. So I have a really different business model than a potter who can sit down and throw 30 of the exact same cylinder mugs, slap a handle on, dip in a solid color glaze. My pots are slow. So to make what I need to cover my time, my price point's higher. And that is not as difficult as I thought it would be starting off, but it's just a matter of finding the right audience at the right show. So I know for me, like, I can't do anything that's non-art fair. If I set up at a street festival, people don't quite understand. I need an audience who understands art and can look at my mug and say, oh, that's why it costs $54. This clearly has a lot of time in it. So I was like you, I learned that through trial and error. I tried some shows earlier that were like art and antique shows. Nope, they have to be art specific for me. But I also, at the same time, I know people who can do street fairs and do great. You just have to figure out who your audience is, and that comes through trial and error. I also always encourage people to research shows a lot. I'm curious if you have a favorite way, if you are considering a new show, how do you learn whether or not you think it would be a good fit?
Mostly I ask a ton of questions, and I have from the beginning. Like, I will friend all the artists around me, and I will basically take paper and be like, so what's your best show? What's your worst? Why? Where do you like to go? So I've been asking a lot of questions for 12 years. I also, the Facebook group, the Art Fair review group, I will use the search tool there. And if it's a show that, people I'm close to, nobody knows anything about it, I'll just search it. And those are my top 2 go-to ask to figure out a show.
Yeah, same. I do that too. I also have figured out that even though there are fewer potters doing the art and craft fair circuit that have really slow work like mine, we're a rare stubborn breed, these slow potters. But I have found that there are other artists who make different work, but are kind of have a similar customer as I do. Like some of the higher end jewelry artists, I find that we share a lot of the same customers, and I'll find those people at shows and I'll specifically seek them out and be like, hey, where else do you sell well? But I also learned the hard way, when you go around and you ask what a good show is, a good show means something so different to different people. I had one man, when I started doing shows, sit down and make a list of 20 shows. And I only learned after watching him sell a weekend that a good show for him was him covering his expenses, which is not a good show in my book. But he was retired. This was fun for him. He was traveling around with his wife. And I mean, that's great. I'm so glad that he could be happy doing that, but that's not
great for him, but that's not for you.
No, this is how I make my living. So also I've just gotten kind of ballsy about asking people, like, can you tell me what a good show looks like to you? Like, I'll tell you how much I sold this weekend if you'll tell me how much you sold. Like, do you mind sharing that? And 9 times out of 10, people say yes.
Yeah.
Because that helps Melissa as much as it helps me if we share numbers, you know?
Yeah.
Also, we talked about researching shows, but we haven't talked about how you even apply to them. So there are a lot of ways to do this, but it keeps getting more and more streamlined every year. And Tennessee Craft uses Zapplication, which this is probably when Julie is going to jump in a little bit, but that's also not the only way. So Julie, you want to talk a little bit about how people apply to the Tennessee Craft Fair?
Yeah, so we, like Audrey said, we we have a license with zapplication.org. It isn't the only way to apply to shows, but it's a big way. So a lot of people find our show just by searching on Zap. But when we are looking at applications, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give when you are looking at an application and you are, trying to determine if the show is a good fit for you, because art shows are not all things to all people. Like Audrey said, some people fit better at some shows than they do at others. And that's fine. That's how it should be. But read the application. I mean, just read the whole thing, and then read it again. Make sure that it is a fit for you. A lot of shows we do ourselves, but most of them have non-refundable application fees. And so that, for us, that's a jury fee. So it's, read the application to determine if your work is even eligible. One of the best examples I can give is that for our spring fair, we accept artists who live, work, or study in Tennessee and contiguous states. So any state that touches Tennessee. Florida does not touch Tennessee. It might seem like it does, but it does not. And so we have we had someone from New York apply to the spring show this year, and we had to go back and say, hey, you're not eligible for this show. And they had just skipped right over it, and just gone, oh, hey, this show looks great, I think I'll apply, and not read the eligibility requirements. And there are a lot. I mean, the application is long, but we want to be transparent. We want to give you as much information as we can on the front end. Another thing is like various mediums, how if maybe a show doesn't take, like, say they don't take photography or they don't take painting, just make sure that you're reading the application and being very diligent about those eligibility requirements. Some shows have, they'll have a count as to whether they have X number of pre-accepted spaces and X number of juried spaces. We don't necessarily do that way, but that's just us. That's not the same for every other show. But some promoters require that information. I believe Zap is requiring that for the shows that have that piece, basically. I think, I would assume, I don't know this for sure, and Audrey and Melissa might be able to speak more into it. I would assume that most shows require white tents. So if you have a pink tent, you're going to need a white one. So it's, you just wouldn't want to show up somewhere that you've driven 6 hours and you don't have the right equipment or the right setup, just simply because, you might not have read the application thoroughly. Is there, what else, Audrey, or Melissa, would you say is a question that you get a lot, and as far as applying, or that you've heard a lot?
I mean, I'll say when I started doing craft fairs, My biggest issue was figuring out what photos to use.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony is, at the time, I was teaching photography classes. So my photos were of good quality, but I'm pretty sure they were the reason I was not getting into as many shows as I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because what I was showing in my pictures was not what the jurors were used to seeing. And I didn't know this because I had never, how
Right.
do you learn that, right?
Right.
Well, I learned because I didn't get into shows, and then I asked my artist friends what their pictures looked like and connected the dots. But some of the mistakes I've realized a lot of people make is they'll so for example, since I make functional pottery, I thought, oh, the juror of course would want to see that I'm going to bring a range of work. So I submitted pictures of my mugs and pictures of my teapots. They know potters make mugs. I didn't, like that was a missed opportunity for me. I should have shown, if I can send 4 or 5 pictures, I should have sent all pictures of the showpieces that like really show what I'm capable of as an artist. They know I'm going to bring mugs. I think that was hurting me. I was also showing groupings, like I'd show a small set, and I got the advice from another artist friend. They're like, no, show a big piece or a piece per image. Don't show a stack of bowls. I made that change. I started getting into way more shows. I've had friends who have used props in their pictures and not gone into shows. Like they really, what I'm learning is it seems like most jurors want a very simple solid color or simple gradation backdrop, and they want a piece and they expect it to be your best piece that you're going to have at that show. Or if it's not the exact piece you'll have within the body of work that will be at the show.
It should definitely be within the body of work that's going to be at the show, because for our show, we have a blind jury panel, so they don't know whose work they're looking at. And then that jury panel actually comes to the fair and walks the fair and scores there as well. And that's how we determine our pre-accepted for the next for the next spring show or the next fall show, is those on-site scores. But yeah, they want to make sure essentially that you brought what you said you were going to bring. If Audrey had put in her application that she, was going to bring all of this clay stuff, and then at some point along the way decided she was going to be a jeweler, that's not what she was juried in for. You have to bring the things that you said you were going to bring. And jurors are able, especially on Zap, I'm not sure about other applications, but they can zoom in, they can zoom right into your photos and look at little details. Clean images are best. Clean images with with no background or a gradient background. And also from my perspective, I'm not a juror, but from my perspective, I'm also looking at your photos to determine what to use on our public postcard and our public, our advertising. And if your photos are maybe not the best lit, so, think about getting a light box, think about getting a ring light even, would help. A plain background that my graphic designer can cut out. And just put the object, whatever that might be, on the postcard, in the ad, that we can put on, in the program guide, that kind of thing. The clean look is really important. And a lot of times I will, when I'm pulling photos for our designer to choose from, I'll pass by somebody whose work is great, but their photos aren't as they aren't as crisp, or they have there's just a lot of noise happening, because it's difficult to figure out how that's going to work on a postcard, or like I said, in an ad or something like that. So it's not just the jurors that are looking at your photos. Also, we now require a booth shot. And so some folks have called and said, I've never done a craft show before. I don't have a booth shot. And I say, well, you're going to need to borrow a tent. Borrow a tent from somebody and set it up like you think you might set up at a craft fair, and take a picture. It doesn't have to be exactly what you think it might be at a show. But if an application says 5 pictures of your work and a booth shot, then that's something that's required on the application. You have to figure out a way to do that, even if you've never done it before. And it's good practice. I've had several people who have just uploaded kind of a JPEG of text that says, "This is my first show. I don't have a booth shot." And I'm like, oh.
Well, it also speaks to professionalism like that.
Yeah.
They don't have enough inventory to take a booth shot. So are they going to show up to the show with enough inventory?
Right. Exactly. So you need to, read the application. If you don't have enough inventory to take a booth shot even in a borrowed tent, then maybe rethink your plan. That's not to discourage anybody from applying, but think about the requirements of the application plus the requirements of the show.
I want to keep us moving because we have a bunch to cover in half an hour. But Melissa, do you have any other quick notes on common mistakes you see in applications, or advice on getting that booth shot? Anything we jumped over?
No, I think you covered everything I was thinking. So
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, also one other thing in my notes is make sure that you're picking the correct medium. So if you make furniture out of wood, that's fine. But for us, come in as furniture. You make things to sit on. You make a chair, you make a table, whatever. But if you make wooden pieces, then you're going to come in under wood. The other part is, if you have a question, if you are not sure, please call us, email us, ask us questions. That is why we are here. I love to talk to artists about what they make, and how they make it. Email is great. But yeah, just make sure that you're coming in under the right medium.
Yeah, and we mentioned this application where you can search for shows, and there's a calendar of not just when the show is, but when the application deadlines are. But there's also entry thingy is real common. Mm-hmm. Some shows don't even use those, and I think Lexington's your hometown, right, Melissa? So yes. The Lexington Art Fair, which I love doing, they just do it through their website. You just have to find out that show exists and get on your radar and get on their newsletter. There are some rogue shows like that you have to just figure out when the application fee is right on your calendar, keep track. So let's move on to the nuts and bolts of doing a show. Our goal is by 7:30 to be able to open this up to some questions if people have them. So let's say that you applied and you got accepted, which the majority of the shows I do, well, I'm going to take that back. All the shows I do are juried. So there's also that, just because you apply doesn't mean you get in. Apply to more than you need, especially early on. But let's say you do get in. Melissa, how much inventory do you take to a show?
I do enough to make my display look nice and full, and then have a little bit of backstock. And depending on the size show, I might have a lot of backstock. But I learned very early on that if I do not have much out, nothing really moves. And I also do wholesale, and I've learned that with my stores. If they're down to a few pieces, my pieces don't move. And if they place a nice big order, stuff starts moving again. So whatever you decide your display is going to be, you want to make it look really full.
Yeah. Same. I also have recently adopted the rule of thumb. This is a hard question to answer because a jewelry artist who has a good show for them is selling 3 $2,000 necklaces, they're going to bring a different amount of inventory than a potter or, someone selling handmade books. But I've started think of it in terms of whatever your sales goal is dollar wise. If you want to hit that, if let's say I want to sell $3,000 at a show, I need to bring at least twice that. I usually say 3 times that much, because if you have a lot of variety in your work, you can't just assume that you're going to sell out and make your sales goal. Like you said, as soon as your inventory gets thin, things don't sell as well. So however much you want to sell, whatever that goal is for you, you need to bring considerably more than that, especially so people have options. They might want that book, but they want it in blue and not green. And if you're low on options, they may not be as quick to buy. So I try to bring at least 3 times however much I want to sell. So the question I get so often when people tell me they want to start doing shows is they say, okay, so what's there for you when you show up? And the comedic
A smiling face.
Yeah,
my smiling face and my support.
The reason we're all laughing is because 99.9% of the time when you get accepted to an art fair and you pay your booth fee, you are paying for square footage of either grass, pavement, or indoor convention center floor space. I mean, that's it. So you really are expected to bring everything. And there are some venues that give you the option to rent things. So for example, like if you do some of the American Craft Council shows, those are indoor shows, you can rent tables, you can rent like curtains to divide off your area, and they'll have that there waiting on you. However,
we do that too. Our tent company that puts up our big tents, if you want to rent a tent from them, you can do that, but it does cost.
Yeah.
So.
And I suspect, Melissa, how many artists who do more than, I don't know, let's say 3 shows a year, how many of them actually rent stuff that you know of?
Only a few, and the only times would be if they're coming so far away that they're flying. Or I rented a tent a couple years ago for the first time because I knew the show was so big that I could not fit enough inventory and my tent in my car. And so instead of renting a bigger car to put my tent in, I just rented a tent. Another state, I found another artist close by that I could borrow their tent once I was there. So I have a little car, but yeah, most of us don't. Every penny counts, and so we don't go spending it on things like renting things you could already just have, and yeah, do it yourself.
It's a great option if you just want to try a craft fair and you don't want to invest in a tent. I mean, thank goodness Tennessee Craft gives you that option. That is a wonderful option to have. So let's talk about, okay, now that we know you have to bring everything, the first thing you need is a tent. Melissa, what's your tent philosophy? Because you kind of have 2 categories of tent folks. You have the easy up people who get either the real basic white pop-up canopy, or you have the people who have the more solid metal frame tents that take a little longer to put up and they cost a lot more. But tell us about your tent choice, Melissa.
So I have a light dome. It takes longer to put up, but not as long as a trim line. And I can do it by myself. I started with an easy up. I started with an expensive easy up. So I think mine cost about $350, but it's because it said it was water resistant, which I need because I have paper products. So that matters a lot. I also sprayed it with like the stuff you get at Walmart, you put on your tent, when you go camping. But I started with the easy up and it lasted me about 3 years and came down on a Sunday in the middle of the show after a storm. So that happens to a lot of people. They do say easy up, easy down for a reason. But I know people whose easy ups have lasted a long time, but after that first storm, I knew that it was too stressful to do that. And I actually found my light dome used from another artist. And then I've just, as pieces have needed replaced over the years, I replace it. But so you can find affordable options. You just kind of have to hunt and then maybe drive for it. But what about you?
Yeah, I have a light dome too, and I started with that. So I would definitely say if your work is fragile, you probably want to go ahead and invest in a good tent. And like Melissa said, those tents have great resale value if you decide you're not going to do shows anymore. I mean, I think even though I think my light dome tent when I bought a couple years ago was around $1,100, and I think I got a couple of maybe an add-on or two. I think I got up front, I got the back porch like pop out awning, so it was a little above the basic. But I'm pretty sure I could sell that and get 3/4 of my money out even today with it being a couple years used. They just hold up great. So it's lower risk than you think, even though it's a big upfront investment. Those trim lines are really nice. I have a lot of friends who do those too. They're just a little heavier. I'm a shrimpy human, so and I also have maxed out the payload of my truck. So those pounds matter. Yeah. And then the last thing I encourage people to think about, even if let's say that you make wooden decor that could get rained on, it could fall off the table and it could be okay. And you're thinking like, why would I spend big money on a tent? It's because you are also liable if your tent blows into me and breaks all of my stuff. That's what people don't think about. And Julia, I have a hunch you might have something to chime in on this too.
As we all discovered together in this past spring, winds, especially in the South, weather in the South is just really unpredictable in the spring. And on the new lawn at Centennial Park, we are not allowed to stake. So when I first met Audrey, I believe she was working on her tent and she was twisting these like huge, massive spikes that were curved into the ground. And I was like, oh my gosh, that must be a tent stake. I had never seen one before. And those do hold really well. But with the construction of the reconstruction of Centennial Park, there is a massive irrigation system now under the Great Lawn, and tent stakes will puncture that that irrigation system, and we don't want that. So Metro Parks does not allow us to stake anymore. You must have a weighted tent solution. As we learned in May, even the professionally weighted tents, some of them they flipped. A lot of the artists, in various parts of the fair, we did see a lot of the easy up tents that were, in trees or in a creek or down on West End. That was also an option that several tents blew away. So, making sure that you have a solid tent that's going to withstand weather. I mean, it's never a guarantee, and it's, there is an inherent risk in doing outdoor shows. Yeah. There just is.
By tornado, it's a tornado.
We can't do anything about the weather. So there's, I would also encourage people to think about like business insurance as far as, insuring your tent, insuring your work. And you guys may be able to speak more to that. But when you lose everything and when your tent collapses from a storm and you lose everything and you don't have insurance, that is a huge blow. And that happened to a lot of people this past spring. So in May with the storm that came through. So I would really, really encourage you to look at those options and see what's going to work for you.
I'm going to chime in on that.
Yeah.
Because Julia read my mind too. So I think what she said is spot on. Like we can do everything right, and there can still be a storm that's so bad that no matter how good your setup is, it goes down. So it is a risk. And I will say that the spring craft fair, for most of the people I've spoken to who have been doing shows for like 40 years, labeled that one of the worst.
That was one of the worst. Yeah, it was
not common.
That's not common.
That's not common at all, but it is a risk. And so my work's fragile. So as a result, I have my inventory insured, and I also have liability insurance. Mm-hmm. And in the process of getting that, I learned the hard way that all insurance policies are not created equal. So I, for a long time, had on my homeowner's insurance an extra line. I paid an extra like $200 a month to have my pottery inventory as a line item under our coverage. And State Farm, I said, this is what I do, this is what I make, this is where it's going. I need extra insurance to cover it. And they said, okay, here's a policy. And I paid it for 3 years. Only after a couple years did I get somebody on the phone. Thank God it wasn't when I was trying to file a claim, who said, yeah, just so you know that if your work is covered, but it's only covered for replacement material cost, should something happen. And I then learned by talking to a commercial insurance agent that almost all commercial insurance policies, these are called merchant marine policies that cover work that is inventory or market goods that are moved around. Almost all of them would only cover my work at replacement material cost. And that does nothing when you're a potter, because clay's the cheap part. Like, it's my time, you know. I have that $54 mug. I have a couple bucks of materials, like less than $10 worth. So there is a happy ending, and that's that I learned that there are art-specific policies. And there's one through the American Craft Council, but you have to upgrade your American Craft Council membership to a professional level to qualify. But there's also a company called Insurance for Artists. There's Art Insurance Now. There's MDP Insurance. I have a policy through Locked In Affinity. And then there's ACT, which I have as well, which I'll talk about in a second. But one good resource, if you've never been to the Surf Plus, that's CERF and then plus sign. The Surf Plus website, they're a wonderful artist support network. They have a whole page that is about art-specific insurance plans. So you can go there. That's how I learned about a lot of the ones I just read off to you. But these plans are all designed for artists. So I have in writing in my policy that my work is insured for retail value, whether it's in my studio, whether it's in the back of my truck and I get rear-ended, or it's at a show and a tree falls on it. The only thing I'm not covered for is terrorism or acts of malice, but that's it. Outside of that, I'm covered. So just keep that in mind. And it's only, I think I have $25,000 worth of coverage, and that includes my studio equipment too. And it only cost me, I want to say $350 a year. Like,
it's worth it.
That's very worthwhile. And then the other policy I have is through ACT, which is short for Artists, Craftsmen, and Tradesmen. And that's my liability. So if somebody comes in my booth and hurts themselves on my display, if my display blows into them in a freak weather accident, I'm covered if they get hurt. If there's a material flaw in my work, where let's say my part of my plaster wedging table chipped off into my clay, I didn't know it, there's a little piece of plaster on the wall of a pot, it pops out down the road and someone ingests that piece of pottery shard and gets hurt, I'm covered. And I think that's just the responsible thing to do if you're a business owner, especially if you own your home, especially if you're practicing as a sole proprietor. You really want liability insurance so somebody doesn't take your retirement assets just because some crazy thing happened. There's my lecture. I'm sorry to get preachy about it, but I'm very passionate about people having insurance. Melissa, what do you think? What are your best practices to avoid worst case scenarios, whether it's weather or anything else?
Well, I also have ACT and then insurance that covers my studio. But I guess, so for 10 years after that Easy Up experience, the weather I encountered, I was able to get through it all right until this spring. And I replaced the same pole on my tent 2 shows in a row, including the Tennessee Craft Show. And at the Tennessee Craft Show, because of the show I'd been in prior to that in Alabama, you know, I had 400 pounds on my tent. Mm-hmm. So at some point, no amount of weight is going to keep your tent from moving. But I will say that have more if you can. And weigh it down a lot of different areas. You know, you definitely want the corners, but stability bars matter, putting weights on the stability bars. Yeah, stake when you can, but if they tell you not to, there's a reason. So, you know, and so you don't want to, I know some people will just do it anyway, but usually it's because of irrigation. And, you know, these shows we're making connections and relationships, and we don't want to have those ruined. So, yeah.
Yeah, I also, I don't leave my work out when I'm not there. I think if your work's fragile or not waterproof,
Yeah.
you'll just sleep better if your work is not sitting there in a tent. So I keep my inventory in the tent. I just pack it up. I put all my pots in bins. And if something falls, like at the Tennessee Craft Fair, my tent was okay, but my neighbor's tent rolled over mine and knocked some stuff over in the process. And it was all fine. I just stood it back up, and thank goodness none of my pots were out, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a pain. Like, it takes extra time, but it's just part
Yeah,
of
I
it.
do the same thing.
I think there's probably a lot of people who went through what they went through at the fair this spring who will probably change their procedures. And that's a really hard lesson to learn. And I hate that they had to learn it. And it's just, it was awful. It was really awful. But again, you know, that weather is an inherent risk at an outdoor show. And like I said, you know, our professionally weighted tents with the tent company that we use, that they set up tents all over town and have hundreds and hundreds of pounds of weights on each corner. Some of them didn't hold it was too much. So yeah, so it's just something to think about and to consider.
And there also are indoor shows too. If you just,
there are indoor shows.
And I mean, I do know artists who, because of various health concerns in their lives, outdoor shows are just not a good fit for them anymore. You know, they have mobility issues that are not ideal for grass all weekend and things like that. There are a lot of different types of shows too, and maybe that's another part of you finding the right fit. At the same time, I'll say the outdoor shows in this region, I sure find to be extremely lucrative. So in the long run, your overhead's lower, the booth fees are lower outdoor shows, and I can make a bigger profit. And I just, you know, prepare the best I can, and I'm insured in case something happens. And I make my living doing that. And I think it's very doable, but you just have to always know that's a thing. You know, you have to respect Mother Nature. So let's talk about, we talked a little bit about like avoiding bad weather, things like that. I'm curious to hear some more logistics from Melissa. So, okay, so we've talked about, you know, maybe you want to spring for that professional grade tent. You gotta get a display. That alone is a loaded question. What does a good display look like? What's your philosophy there, Melissa? What's your solution?
Well, I encourage people to walk shows and to get ideas. I mean, we all pull ideas from each other anyway. And then, you know, I've done a little research here and there, played around on Pinterest. And then I'll do a bunch of research, and then I'll just like drop it for a few days and let my mind relax, because then other things can start to come in and kind of build on that. And that's where it becomes your personal display, and, you know, you'll start having some of your ideas. But honestly, it is also trial and error. When I think back to when I first started, I took this little class down in Florida that was like, you always want to have your tables up because nobody wants to bend over to look at your work. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess you do that with cement blocks. So I was lugging cement blocks around with tables to lift my tables up. And then I was like, oh, these are really heavy. So I got wooden blocks. And then I learned about, you know, the bed raisers that are really light and don't take up a lot of room, or PVC pipes. I mean, I have gone up to artists before and asked to look under their table. Like, Paul, how did you put your table up? Well, how did you do that with the wall there? I've taken pictures of how people have bungee corded like weights on, and how they've kept their walls down, just random stuff. Yeah, but the display thing is really kind of trial and error, and also you get to kind of be creative, but really think about how much work it is, and if you want to do that much work setting it up, because some people don't mind taking longer doing that. Like I said, my car is small, so I have to think about space, and I personally like to keep things more efficient and less time setting up. So yeah.
Yeah, and also, you know, it's not just your tent that deals with the weather. I've seen Tents be fine, but displays blown over in the wind. I think it's important to think about, like, are you creating a giant parachute with your lovely bookshelf that's going to go airborne, or is your display heavy enough to deal with some wind? Will it collapse up? Those are all really good considerations. I also want to encourage people to think about how you value your artwork and how your customer will value it, and how that might change in different contexts. So I think my work looks really awful with a tent wall behind it. I think that it would be very hard for me to sell high-end, high-priced pottery in front of a white sheet of vinyl. I have to create an environment in my tent that helps people be able to pretend that, oh, this could be in my home. This is a kind of domestic-like setting. I can easily imagine what that would look like. You see a lot of the jewelry artists who have really high-end expensive work. They have very nice lighting. They bring those batteries out to shows. I mean, I think if you want to charge high prices for your work and your work warrants that because of the time and energy and materials that go into it, you might need to make sure that your display reflects that.
Yeah, and think about the details, because even if like you said, with not wanting to have just a tent wall, like even curtains or whatever, those details your customer might not notice because they're busy looking at your product, but on some level they're picking up all those details. So making sure your legs of any tables or any shelves that you don't want seen are covered, like that all matters. You know, you're creating a little store, and it's a little space like you would welcome somebody into your home, and you want it to be inviting. And when you think about color, you want to make sure that your work stands out against whatever you're putting it on, and that it's not like blending in, and so people aren't even seeing your product.
Yeah, or you have so many props in your booth that people aren't seeing your artwork. That's the other thing I see a lot of. Like, I know somebody who has beautiful work, but they bring all these plants to their booth, and it's beautiful, but you walk in and you see the plants, you don't see their work.
You're not sure if it's a plant seller or a
right. Same thing around the holidays. People will have giant Christmas trees to sell their little $5 Christmas ornaments, and meanwhile their $100 fancy things are in the corner and you don't even see them because there's this giant Christmas tree taking up all the space with lights, and that's where their cheapest item is. You know, you have to make sure that whatever props you need are understated a little bit and not competing with your work.
We do have a question that popped up in the chat. How about fire codes about curtains? As far as curtains go, I can tell you that when there's not COVID, let's just, in the normal times, in the before times, fire code in Nashville, and it may be the same in other places, fire codes require 2 feet between booths. So we mark off, when we're doing stakeout, we mark off 12, sorry, I'm thinking about to sneeze. Nope, I'm good. It's a 12-foot space. So 12 by 12 foot space, because your tents are 10 by 10. So if you put the 10 by 10 tent smack in the middle of your 12 by 12 space, and the next person puts theirs in the middle of their 12 by 12 space, then you've got 2 feet in between the booths. As far as the interior of the tent, there aren't any like, you know, codes that I'm aware of. It's mostly the outer, the setup, basically. I know, Audrey, and I'm glad that you mentioned your curtains, because I remember you telling me that when I walked into your booth, that you put the gray curtains on the inside because of the way that your pottery looks against white. You know, it's totally a personal preference. Do y'all have are there any other like fire code regulations that you guys have run into?
I've only done one show that had rules about what's inside your tent, and that was I did the original street fair in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and anything hanging from your tent had to have fireproof or fire retardant certification from the manufacturer, or you had to bring the product that you had personally flame treated it with, or flame resistant treated it with. So there was a spray that I bought and sprayed on my curtains, and that was enough to get me through fire codes. But they said my wooden shelves were fine. It was just anything hanging from the tent. But I've only ever had one show where that was the case. And I've never traveled quite as far as Melissa has. Most of my shows are within a 9-hour radius. And these days they're mostly within a 6-hour. Melissa, have you run into that anywhere else?
Not like curtains, but the it's the Upper Arlington Festival. They actually send firemen around to check and see your manufacturer label on the tent to make sure that it's fire retardant. But if you have a light dome or something, all those are on there. You don't have to worry about it. The only other one was a Ren Fair I did in St. Louis. You had to have a fire extinguisher in your booth. But if you read your applications, you see those details. So, and those applications are like 15 to 20 pages. So these art show ones are very simple compared. So reading them matters. Yeah.
While we're on the topic too of things you take too, I also have a lot of people ask me how long I have to set up at shows, and that is something that really varies. Melissa, what is the common denominator, and then what are the extremes in your experience?
I would say for most of the shows that I do, we usually have at least the day before to set up. And so there's kind of like a long range of time for the most part. I have done the early morning. That would be an extreme where you can't get there till like 5 and you have to be open by 9 or something crazy. That was like in Chicago. I know there's a group of shows that are like that. That's one extreme.
That's
and again,
not my favorite.
You would say that in your application. There are a few shows I have not applied to because I know I need minimum 4 hours to set up.
Right.
Yeah.
Something else I just thought of, and I meant to say it earlier, on the application, when you are applying to shows, consider what kind of work that you make. If you have glass, then you want a lot of our glass artists will say that they want to be in full sun. They don't want to be in the shade. But an artist like Melissa who does leather, or we have several fiber artists who they don't want their work to fade or be sun damaged. They want to be under a tree if that's possible. So put that in your application. If there is a spot to put some kind of, accommodation for space, definitely put that in there. Also, if you have, for our fair especially, if you have mobility issues, put that in your application, because we do, when we were laying out the show this time, that is one of the first things that we look at. We look at to see if you have a big trailer, the kind of equipment that you're bringing with you. If you have a long trailer, we're going to invite you to come in early, and we are going to get you in and get you out and out of the way. And, load in these last several fairs has seemed to go a lot smoother, just simply because those big rigs are not taking up so much space. The second people that we place are usually people who state that they have mobility issues. Or somebody this time was recovering from surgery from a broken foot or something, and so she requested to be, close to load in. And so I had a great spot for her, and I was like, yes, you will go right there. And somebody else was recovering from some other kind of surgery and requested to be close to the bathrooms. And, so we were able to accommodate those people. We can't accommodate those requests if we don't know about them. And as far as, shade and light go, we do the best we can, but, not every, there's often more people who want shade than there are trees. So, that is something to consider, but yeah, if you need accommodations for whatever reason, put that in your application, because we need to know that when we're laying out the show, because we want you to have a good show too. And if you're, if you have mobility issues and you're having to walk 100 yards to get to your booth, then you're not going to have a good show. So.
Yeah, for sure. So we're at 7:30 and we want to make sure we save some time for questions, but I'm looking at the chat and we don't have a backlog of questions. So if you're watching and you have questions that you've been saving for the question answer, go ahead and start typing them in there. In the meantime, I still have some questions on our list that we didn't get to. So I'm just going to keep on going. But the second I see a bunch of questions pop up down there, we'll start transitioning into question answer. Yes, Melissa?
I don't know if you're going to switch topics, but something else that I think is important to remember to bring or see if you need to bring is a dolly.
Yes.
Because I have a small car, I don't take a dolly to every show. Some shows I know I don't have to, so I can put inventory in that space instead. But there are plenty of shows where you need a dolly and you do not want to show up without one.
For sure. Yeah. I also encourage you to read applications very carefully to see the hours of the show, because there are some shows that go past dark and you have to have lights, and not every show provides you with electricity. A lot of shows with long hours will sell you electricity, but sometimes I think that cost is outrageous, if I'm being completely honest. I did one show where they were going to charge me $100 for power for the weekend. And that's more than my home electric bill is for some months, you know, like that's just crazy. So I instead took that $100 and bought marine batteries, like big boat batteries. And I have a power inverter that changes the power current to be compatible with normal lamps and plugs. And I have just track lighting that I Velcro to my tent frame, and I can plug the heads in, and I run an extension cord over to my inverter and plug it in. And I have 2 of those batteries, and I can definitely last multiple days with that. But since I have 2, I can always take one home with me at night to the Airbnb or the hotel and charge. But that's something that most shows don't go past dark, but some do, and you don't want to be the one person there without lights. That you will not sell anything in the dark. Trying to think other things that are not obvious to take. I mean, I'm such a, well, most shows do give you water, but I always bring my own too, because you just never know if they're going to be short on volunteers one day and not be able to get it.
That's our thing. You know, we would love to be able to give out water constantly, but it does require a lot of volunteers. And sometimes we just, especially for various shifts, we just don't have the people power to hand out water. And so, you know, bring your own water, bring your own snacks. You know, we do a complimentary, like a continental breakfast. And you know, not all shows do that, but that is a perk that we are excited to offer artists. But you know, we don't do food throughout the day either. So I would really encourage you to bring your own water.
Yeah, I bring backups of a lot of things too. So if you're using you know, a pay by square type payment system for the weekend, I always have an extra card reader. I always have a backup way to charge my phone in case it dies. I always have, I even bring an extra tent leg to shows. Anything that if I didn't have it working correctly would prevent me from making money, I try to bring an extra, because I do not want to be 6 hours away. And I even, last year I was in, I'm sorry, 2 years ago, I did St. James in Louisville, and the entire city's AT&T cell service was down. And Pay by Square does have a way that you can process payment offline, but you don't know if the card's been declined or not. Like, you know, 9 times out of 10, it's gonna be fine. But after that show, I got so spooked that now I even have a like pay-as-you-go cell phone plan that is the opposite. I think they're Verizon towers, so that if I get to some crazy obscure place and there's only Verizon coverage and not AT&T, I can swap my SIM card and just pay for however much data I use that weekend. That's my new level of paranoia and having redundancy. Anything else come to your mind, Melissa?
You want to bring packaging.
Yes.
Bags, tissue paper, boxes, however you package your product. And for me, an important thing to bring is energy. It's easy to make all your stuff and kind of be tired and set up your tent and your display and kind of be tired. And then when you start for the show, especially in the early years, I was shy about talking about my work. and people want to talk to you. They want to hear how you make it. They want to know why, what your inspiration is. So engaging people will sell your work, and it matters. So bring energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually kind of a good time to pivot into some of we kind of talked about the physical things, but the strategy behind actually selling your work. You know, you do need to be a salesperson. That's something that most artists are not trained to do. And like Melissa said, the energy you bring really matters. I think it's really important to learn how to articulate your process and what makes your work unique, and learn how to start conversations with people even before they start conversations with you. I've seen artists who, you know, maybe it's a 3-day show and Friday it was rainy, it didn't go well, and, you know, Starbucks messed up their coffee order and they're just having a bad, grumpy Saturday morning, and they bring that energy to the booth and they're in the corner, like, you know, on Facebook on their phone and whatever, and their day doesn't get better. You know, if you bring that energy in, people are not going to be attracted to your booth and interested in engaging with you. So you do have to kind of go into that bubbly sales.
I've walked through and seen artists reading books, just sitting in the back of their booth reading a book. And I'm all for a good book as much as the next person, but you know, that doesn't necessarily help you be approachable.
Yeah.
One of the things, the other things that we require is an artist statement in your booth. And so, you know, make sure that not only is that something that most shows require for the application, but a lot of them, I believe, require them, like I said, we do, to actually be on display in your booth. So make sure that you're reading the application to see if that is a requirement. We actually give an award for best artist statement. And strong artist statements. But, you know, for Tennessee Craft, we are very focused on the individual artist. So if in your, you know, make sure that you're writing your artist statement to fit the show that you're going to, especially if, like us, we focus on the individual, or if it's a collaboration, you know, between maybe a husband and a wife. We have a lot of artist pairs that are that way. Stating something like, our company makes this way. Think about the show that you're going to, because we're gonna flag that for us is gonna go, oh, do you have assistants? Do you not make all of your own work? You know, we're gonna say, you know, tell us a little bit more about your process, and then you know, maybe it just turns out that you are the individual who makes the work, and you just need to maybe rewrite a little bit. But make sure that you're, you know, looking at each show specifically to know what they're actually asking for.
Melissa, I'm curious. Could we like do a little role play? And can I be a customer walking into your booth? And would you feel like modeling for us how you would begin a conversation?
Yeah, I will tell you what I do now.
Ooh, look at this nice booth. Ooh, nice leather goods. Is that a handmade book? Let's go in. Burr, burr, burr.
Hello, have you seen my work before?
No.
Well, welcome. I've got hand-bound books, and I also have refillable books, and I make everything in the tent with these guys, and I use all reclaimed leather. I also have some leather bags, and I do all of those on an industrial sewing machine.
What is an industrial sewing machine?
That is one that can go through boat sails. It's super fast, yeah. And it's where I live a lot of my life, actually.
So then let's say I go over and I'm just now quiet and I'm looking at things. What would you do? Would you keep talking? Would you back off?
So it depends on the person. With some people, you can tell that they want space just to experience, and maybe they're thinking of a gift, or they're wondering what they want to get, and so I would give them a little time. But I would still stand. I would not have my hands folded. I'd have my body open. I would be close enough by that they could feel like they could ask questions. maybe I'm paying attention to other people also in the booth, but I'm letting them know I'm still around if they have questions. But if I kind of felt like you might want to still engage, if you pick up a book, I might start telling you about the paper. If you're touching a bag, I might say, you can try it on if you want. There's a pocket in the back, there's an adjustable strap. So I might tell you a little bit more about it, but I stay very attentive. When you come into my booth, it really is like coming into a little home that I set up, and I stay attentive to my people. So I because when I walk into a store, I don't want to be smothered, but I don't want to feel like I can't approach you either. So
yeah, for sure.
What do you do?
Sorry?
I said, what do you do?
Oh, I say, hi there, you're welcome to pick things up if you like. Everything I make is hand carved, so there's a little texture on the surface that you're welcome to feel. And I found that one little bit communicates, okay, it gives them an invitation to pick things up, which is always what you want. You want people to start engaging in a tactile way if possible, because touching craft goods, assuming they're touchable, some people can't have their work touched, but I really think that helps sell your work. But the second thing that does is it implies they're all hand carved. Feel all the marks that I have carved into my work. And that very quickly establishes why my price point is what it is. And implies that I'm not just like slapping a decal or a stamp or, I mean, this sounds nuts, but I still have occasionally people walk in who assume I'm buying slip cast pots from China and painting the designs on, which I don't know why someone would assume I'd be at a craft fair doing that, but it very quickly implies that my work is hyper handmade. And then usually they pick something up, and I'll say all the patterns are inspired by historic textiles from India. And at that point, usually they engage in a conversation. And if not, I might back off and give them a little space. Like you said, you don't want to smother people. But as they pick up different things, I'll say, oh, that teapot has a built-in tea strainer in it. You're welcome to take the lid off and see, or, like offer little morsels to help them engage more.
Yeah.
I will say one of the things that we encourage is if it's possible for your particular craft, for you to demonstrate inside your booth. That helps, that can help spur conversations. Certainly, Audrey, you're not going to probably bring a wheel to a craft show, and Melissa, you're not going
to do raku at the Tennessee Craft Fair. I remember that.
And if you're blowing glass, that's kind of difficult to demonstrate. But a lot of people who do fiber or who do jewelry, they demonstrate in their booths, and that's not only is that something to like keep their hands busy and not just sit there and stare off into space, but it does draw people in, and so we certainly encourage artists to do that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome if you can pull that off, and it's also makes good sense to be doing something too.
So this is how it works.
Yeah, and I liked what Melissa said too about body language being really important. I personally found I don't do as well if I'm in one of those super high director's chairs and kind of looking down on customers. I always purposely try to sit lower than they are by quite a bit, so I seem very unintimidating. And I try to have something to do with my hands, even though it's not preventing me from engaging with the customer. Like I'll be like, I don't know, stamping my logo on price tags or some just little thing, but it makes people feel like I'm not a hawk staring them down, because that people won't engage if you're like too hyper focused on them. I think there are lots of tricks to learning how to be approachable.
Yeah, and in my early years, I would just start, telling people about my product. And then what I found is people would cut me off and be like, "Oh yeah, I bought from you, da 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 da." And that's part of why I ask people now, like, "Have you seen my work before?" Because I want to talk to people, but I don't want to assume they don't. Because at this point, people start pulling stuff out of their bags and be like, "Oh yeah, I got this from you in 2014 or whatever." So, which is also super fun. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, let me see it."
Yeah, I get pictures all the time. I get tagged on Instagram of, my travel mug on a boat on a fishing trip in rural Arkansas, and it's like,
cool. Yeah.
That's the magic of craft fairs, is when you sell your work online, you do not get that first person interaction of people coming back year after year and telling you stories about how they've interacted with your work. And that is as good as it gets as an artist, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That is why I still prioritize art fairs and craft fairs. I want to meet my customers. I really enjoy that. And it's crazy too. I mean, I've done shows in Virginia, 9 hours away, and people have saved my business card and looked me up when they've been visiting Nashville 6 months later and come visited my studio and bought $300 worth of work. Like, it's just crazy the connections you make because you're there with your work. Like Julia said, like, you being there, it's very important, and people buying work from an individual and it being, you made it, not like this is a company, this is a.
And that is something that we require. We require the artist who made the work to be there the entire time.
Yeah.
You can't send a representative. You can't, you know, you can have helpers, certainly, because everybody needs a break. You know, a lot of people bring family members, and that's wonderful. But we do require the main artist to be there the whole time. We have a question in the chat. How do you handle it when a customer damages a piece of work in your tent? Ah!
Melissa, you want to?
Well, thankfully that hasn't happened super often. I eat it. I've never made somebody pay for something that their kids had sticky fingers and touched, or that's really the extent of it. One time somebody dropped a journal in mud. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that I can like wipe off and cross my fingers and resew and whatever. But when it is raining, because I have paper products, I am a lot more careful with people. I don't mind telling people what to do. Leave your umbrella outside my booth. I have a towel. Can you dry your hands off before you touch things? I don't know if you noticed, but there's water dripping from the edge of your raincoat. I stay very careful because other people aren't thinking about that, so I have to. So I try to stay ahead of that. I also watch kids with sticky fingers. Yeah, but what do you do, Audrey?
It's only ever happened once, which is pretty incredible considering I make fragile work. It's really not as common as you would think. I've also never had anything oh, I take that back. I did have one thing stolen once, and it wasn't even a piece of pottery. It was a lid off one of my travel mugs. Which is like, why would you steal a $2
Right?
silicone lid?
It's a silicone lid.
That's the only theft. One of my jewelry artist friends did have a ring stolen once, but she also like very much owned up to the fact that she had run to the bathroom and didn't have a booth sitter and just left it. So like she also was like, I was kind of asking for it. In general, like the high-end shows that I do, people are pretty awesome at. There just isn't a huge occurrence, but the one time I had work broken, a guy accidentally rammed a baby stroller into one of my shelves and knocked off 2 things. And he immediately volunteered to pay for it and was so embarrassed. And I felt bad. I come a little deal. He clearly didn't mean to, but I didn't even have to ask him. He like credit card was out. That was that.
Wow.
But yeah, it's not as common as you might think. It's good that people are in general pretty awesome out there. But I really like what you said, Melissa, just staying, it's like clarifying expectations, I think is a very fair thing to do. When somebody's coming into your space, there are polite ways to say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. I'm sorry you got such a rainy day to be at a show. I'm asking people to dry their hands before they touch my work, but I'd love for you to engage. There's still ways to manage without, coming on too strong. Yeah, keep the questions coming. These are good.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I think we haven't talked much about actually processing sales and money, and that's something a lot of people ask me about. So there are a lot of nuts and bolts to the fact that if you do art fairs, you are a business. So, the questions I get asked a lot are, do I have to register my business? Do I have to collect sales tax? How do you process credit cards? Like, there are those nuts and bolts. How do you approach that, Melissa?
Well, I registered my business before I started. And then you have to, with sales tax, every state is different and some are easier than others. And then in some, even if you're not doing any shows there, but like once a year, they make you file frequently. It's awful.
It's awful. Indiana, man.
Indiana, Alabama.
Alabama just got bad. They used to be easy and now they're annoying.
But I got someone good who was like, well, we're just going to turn it off. And then when you do a show again, call us back and we'll turn it on. I was like, that's cool. But
and the awkward thing is shows always tell you what the sales tax is. And they always say, here's the link to the website, but they don't always have the experience of paying sales tax as an artist.
No.
So if you need help paying sales tax, you are probably not calling the show.
No, don't call us.
The Department of Revenue of the
We
state.
also are not allowed to give you any advice.
Yeah.
I can't walk you. I am not allowed to walk you through that. I have to tell you to call the Department of Revenue.
Right.
So,
but
and we're also required to give the Department of Revenue a list of artists who were at the event.
yes.
So if you don't pay your sales tax, they might come find you. That has happened before.
Yeah, they do.
I think that's really important. A lot of people don't realize that, and they think that, oh, like I do 2 shows a year. And there is a threshold. It varies state to state. But if you don't sell more than, $600, $1,000, whatever it is in that state a year, you technically don't have to most of the times, but entirely depends on state law. And if you have a good show anywhere, you're probably way above that and you're having to do it. So definitely collect sales tax. There's a way if you use Pay by Square or any of those systems to just punch it in and it's automatic. It's part of your setup for your checkout. And if in Tennessee, that is automatically added in. I can look at my report at the end of the show and it says your total sales were this much. The sales tax you collected was this much. I mean, it's not hard to keep a track of. You just have to follow through and pay. But some states it's really easy. Some states you just write a check and mail it with a tiny little form that has like 4 blanks on it. Melissa, are you a sole proprietor or do you operate as an LLC?
I'm sole proprietor.
Yeah. I'm an LLC, and I think it might also be worth us taking a couple of minutes to talk about why we made those decisions, because I think what we're each doing probably makes sense for what we're doing. Like I have a lot of people ask me like, oh, do I need to become an LLC? And it's like, well, it just kind of depends on what you make and what your setup is. So,
and what state because you're both in different states.
That too. Why do you operate as a sole proprietor?
The short answer is because my tax lady said that it makes the most sense for my finances. In the beginning, I did it because I did not have any assets. And so it was the easiest thing to do initially. And I also didn't know if this would work. So I was like, I'm just going to do this basic thing. And then if I need to change it, I can. And I looked into it here and there over the years and wasn't sure. And then I, bought a house a few years ago and I was like, well, maybe I need to revisit this. And when I talked to my tax lead about it, she just said, still for what you're doing, this still makes the most sense. So I would just stay with sole proprietor and not worry about it. So,
yeah.
For
me, I'm happy because being a potter has a higher level of liability. Like the reality is what I make becomes sharp when it's broken. And it also is used with food. So if somebody breaks one of my mugs and then cuts themselves on it, that's not on me. They couldn't sue me for that because that's user error. But like going back to the example I said earlier where like, what if there's a material flaw and I can't tell, it looks fine when it comes out of the kiln, but then somebody uses it in the oven and it crazes horribly and there's some glaze fit issue and part of that glaze pops off and someone eats it and is hurt. Like that could be on me. I've talked to lawyers who are like, oh yeah, you have a much higher liability than, a painter who makes something that hangs on the wall like that. Unless it falls off the wall and hits somebody on the head, what's going to happen? And even then it's probably user error because they didn't hang it right, So becoming an LLC, if you're new to that idea, you have to go through a couple of hoops. You have to register with the Secretary of State. You have to file an annual report. It does cost money. I think it cost me $300 a year. And I also had to sell all my assets to the LLC, and I have to have a bank account as the LLC that all my money comes in and goes out of. I can't mix my personal bank account with my business. But and all my insurance is under the LLC too. So my liability insurance is for the business. But all that being said, it means that in the event that something horrible does happen, which hopefully never will, but if something does happen, someone could never take my house, because they could only sue me as a business. They couldn't sue me as an individual. So like my husband's retirement account could not go away just because something happens with my art business. You know, like there are a lot of considerations about that trickle down, but I have higher liability than most. But, you know, it's a good question. And we're really lucky in Nashville to have the Nashville Art and Business Council as a resource. And they have the volunteer lawyer program, where if you're a member of the Art and Business Council, you can get very discounted, if not free, depending on how much money you make a year, legal advice. And that would be a great way to ask, like, what makes sense for me? Because there are a lot of people who just don't need to be an LLC. But for me, it really, it feels good. And the one other consideration is it only protects you from the day that you become an LLC. So like those horrible clunky pots I made in college that I did sell, like if something bad happens with that, I was not an LLC yet. That would still come back on me as a sole proprietor. So there's also that, like, you probably want to do it if you're starting to ramp up and get serious and make a lot of work and sell a lot of work. Don't wait until you are like super duper pro and you've been doing it for 5 years. Like, do it early on if you think that applies to you. But you might be like Melissa, where you just don't have to, but you still need to register your business with the state and be paying your sales tax. And some, like, I have to pay franchise and excise tax as a business in Nashville. Like, there might be some other taxes you have to pay as well. But the Art and Business Council is really great for asking those questions, as is the Nashville Entrepreneur Center if you are local here. Okay, no more questions in the chat, right? We're about out of time.
Right. I wanted to touch real quickly on another part of the application process.
Yeah.
So what happens if you get waitlisted? So in our our process is that we have X number of spots that we can fill because of the size of the show and the show layout. So we have a certain number of people who are pre-accepted, and our pre-accepted process is like fair to like fair. So it's spring to spring and fall to fall. Just because you got pre-accepted for the spring does not mean that you're pre-accepted for the fall. They're two different entities. Your pre-accepted status happens at the fair. So the jury panel that I referenced earlier, they come and they score, they do on-site scores. And so those on-site scores determine whether or not you're pre-accepted for the next spring fair or the next fall fair. We don't have a hard cutoff. It depends on a variety of factors. It depends on how many people, how many artists are there. It depends on the jury panel because it's different every time. So some jurors are always going to score high. Some are always going to score low. Sometimes everybody's score is low. And so that means that a lower score is going to be the cutoff for pre-acceptance. If you are pre-accepted to our fairs, you still have to apply. You still have to actually fill out the application. A lot of times that kind of falls off people's radar because they say, oh, well, I was pre-accepted, I'm going to come. And I'm like, you haven't filled out the application. It's not that you can't come. It's that you have to tell us that you're coming. You have to purchase your booth. So if you think about it in terms of actually filling out the application and purchasing the space that you're going to be in, that is really important to remember. But sometimes you have a low score at the fair and you get waitlisted for the next fair. That's okay, because we always always call people off of the wait list. I went very, very far down the wait list for this spring fair because of a variety of reasons. There were cancellations. There were people who got sick and couldn't come. There were people who just, for whatever reason, were not able to come. Tennessee Craft does not, we don't rank our wait list. We don't number them. So I can't tell you that you're number 3 and you're number 17. Again, it depends on the mix of the show. It depends on, how many of each medium we have, and also the open spots, who's going to fit there, because we don't ever put the same medium next to each other. They might be across from each other, but they're never going to be next to each other, because we want to make sure that we have a really good mix of artists and of mediums throughout the show. So you don't want to have all of the leather artists in one clump, because that just wouldn't make for a very interesting show. So there are always people who don't pay the booth fee by the deadline. And so those people are going to get put on the wait list, and then somebody else is going to get called off the wait list. So just because you get waitlisted does not mean that all hope is lost. We will fill the show up to Wednesday before. So Wednesday before load in on Thursday. I have called people on Wednesday.
Just because you get called off the wait list does not mean you have to do the show either. Like
it also does not mean that.
If you cannot travel with 2 days notice, it's not like you're obligated to.
Right.
Because you get called.
Right. And that also doesn't, a lot of people, some people have asked if that affects them or affects their score. It does not at all. If you can't do it for whatever reason, and even if you are pre-accepted and then you can't do it for some reason, that's okay. You don't have to. You're not required to do it. So that's just something to know. Some shows have a waitlist number, but we don't.
So we're about out of time. There's one last thing we haven't talked about that I think we need to plug real quick. And that is a really cool opportunity. If you've never done an art fair and you're considering Tennessee Craft as your first fair, we have the Emerging Makers program, which is a fabulous way to test the waters without spending big money on a tent, on display, on a truck, if that's what it takes to haul this stuff. It's a really lovely kind of intermediate program. Julie, you want to pitch that real quick to us?
Yeah. So our Emerging Maker application, you were the first to know, it is live now. I made it live today. Woo. So it is, sorry, my phone is now ringing. Go away. Sorry. So the Emerging Makers tent is a low barrier entry into the craft fair. If you've never done a craft show like ours before and you just want to try it, you can do that. It's $25 for the application fee, and it is also a juried process, but it is not juried through the panel that does the main tent circle. It's a different pool of people. It's chapter leaders from each chapter. You do have to be a member to be in the Emerging Makers tent, but you can get, like Audrey said, you can get a taste of selling at a craft fair, and it's in a group setting. It's not, you're not just thrown out there on your own, in your own booth and have to process all these sales by yourself or process sales tax or anything like that. So it's a teaching opportunity. And so each chapter section has a mentor assigned to them. And then they have some artists, usually 4 to 5, depending on the space that we have. And they sell as a group, and they learn from each other. They learn what it's like to be at a craft fair for 3 days, and they learn what it's like to set up a display and to take it down and to restock and to, how much do they need in this particular space, and is the craft fair really what they want to be doing? So it is a great opportunity. You can access that application at tennesseecraft.org/emergingmakers. We're also accepting mentor applications, and that is available on that webpage as well. If you are interested in applying to the fall fair, that application deadline is July the 15th at 11:59 p.m. We do have a 1-day extension for an extra late fee. It's a $15 late fee, so it's a $50 application fee. On July the 16th, we will let you apply. But then after that, the application is closed. A lot of people will call and ask if they can still apply or if we accept late applications. And the answer is no, because the jury process starts almost immediately after the application is closed. So we don't accept late applications.
And real quick too, I just wanted to further plug on that Emerging Makers tent. One of the awesome things is, in addition to the fact, like, you don't have to rent a tent, you're in a group setting, group tent. There's a table there for you to use as your display. You don't even have to bring your own table. And you just pay Tennessee Craft a percentage of your sales. So it's not like you have this huge looming booth. Well, there's a small booth fee, right?
The $25 application fee, it covers, kind of covers the booth fee.
Yeah.
You do pay Tennessee Craft a 20% commission, and it's 20% of your sales. And then of course the chapter takes care of the sales and takes care of paying the taxes. So you don't have to do that. So some people, depending on what they make and what they sell, they might have to pay a pretty hefty commission. It just really depends. And, some of them, it's not going to be as much. So you can do it for 3 fairs. You can be in the Emerging Maker tent for 3 times. You can be a mentor as many times as you want to be. Leslie asked, is the deadline for the Emerging Maker July 15th? Deadline for mentors is July the 15th. The deadline for Emerging Makers is August the 12th.
Awesome. Well, we should probably wrap this up, but this has been a really good conversation. I've certainly had fun chatting with you ladies.
Yeah, you too.
Great questions.
Good to see you guys.
And hopefully you'll see all of our faces at the Fall Tennessee Craft Fair.
Right.
So you're always welcome to come up and ask me questions in person. If you see me, I have no secrets. I will show you what's under my table, as Melissa said. Or the more relevant question for me would be how I pack my truck or something like that. That whole thing, like show up during setup and like walk and offer to help people. Man, I've had people do that and come up and be like, hey, I'm interested in doing craft fairs. Can I help you set up and see what this is like?
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Yes.
That's awesome.
We would love to have you as a volunteer for any part of the fair. That would be awesome as well. So
yeah. So come say hi, ask questions. Melissa, thank you so much for zooming in from out of state. You've been awesome.
Yeah, thank you too. It's been fun.
Where are you next in case people want to pop up and see you?
Well, I'm at the Kentucky Renaissance Fair through July 18th, and then I'll be at the Woodland Art Show in Lexington. So
me too. So come
Yay!
to Lexington and see another fair and say hi to me and Melissa.
Yeah.
Awesome. Julia, thank you for making time.
Yes,
Thanks
of
for
course.
making our fairs happen. That's a very important job to have. Thank you.
Yes.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.